The call came on a Tuesday morning. Her editor used two words that stopped her cold. Long overdue. Senior investigative correspondent. Claire had been circling that title for 15 years. She had to sit down just to finish the conversation. Her first call wasn't to her sister. It wasn't to her agent. It was to Derek. He picked up on the second ring, and something in the first 3 seconds was off. Not wrong in a way she could name. Just off. He asked what the role covered. He asked who'd assigned it. He asked whether she'd already accepted. One question, then another, measured, careful, like he was reading from a list. She laughed, told him to relax. He laughed too. Eventually, the call ended. The feeling didn't. This was the man who'd flown to Melbourne the night her mother died. She'd called him before she called her own sister. 19 years of that, she'd never once heard his voice go that quiet over good news. She opened her laptop, pulled up the investigative brief her editor had forwarded. Names, companies, threads to pull. She was halfway down page 2 when she stopped. One name, Peripheral. 3 lines of background context. Unfind. She read it again. She closed the laptop slowly and stared at the wall. Derek's brother. She didn't sleep well. She knew that before she opened her eyes. By 3 a.m., she'd replayed the call enough times that the details had started to blur. That's what happens when you handle the memory too much. By morning, she'd made a decision. She was overthinking it. Derek knew people across every corner of Melbourne media. Anton's name in a brief wasn't a signal. It was a coincidence. The city wasn't that big. The industry was smaller still. She showered, made coffee, read the brief again. It held together. It was good work. She was going to do good work with it. At the office, 2 colleagues had already heard the news. There was a card, a bottle of wine on her desk, a post-it that just said, "Finally." She smiled at all of it, meant most of it, but she didn't call Derek back. She told herself she was busy. She had calls to make, sources to map, a meeting with her editor at 2. All of that was true. She sat down, opened the brief to page 2, found Anton Fain's name again, without looking for it. She hadn't told herself not to look. That was the part she couldn't explain away. She'd met Derek at a university careers night in 2005. He was already working, 3 years into a media consultancy role. There as a panelist, she was 25 and asking too many questions from the 3rd row. He'd found her afterward. Said she was the only person in the room worth talking to. That was Derek. He meant things like that. He wasn't performing generosity. He just had it, the way some people have good posture. He talked her through her first editorial contract. No agent, no experience. He made the call. He got her a meeting at a publication that didn't take cold approaches. 1 phone call. Done. When a senior editor made her working life quietly unbearable for 8 months, Derek listened to every conversation, never told her what to do, just asked the right questions until she found her own way through. When her mother's condition worsened, he drove her to the hospital, twice. When she died, he was on a plane before Claire had finished the call. She thanked him in print 3 times, once in a foreword, twice in awards pieces. She meant every word, without qualification. And now that history was sitting differently. Not suspicious exactly. Not even doubt. Just the specific discomfort of picking up something you've owned for years and realizing for the first time how heavy it actually is. She called Harriet Yoon on a Wednesday afternoon. No particular reason. The news needed more people in it. People from further back. Harriet and Claire had worked together for 3 years at a publication in South Bank. Close the way colleagues get when the editorial culture is bad enough. Shared lunches. Shared grievances. Friday wine. They drifted when Claire moved on. Not badly, just the natural drift. The congratulations came out warm enough. Harriet asked about the role, the scope, whether it was permanent. Then Claire mentioned the investigative brief. The line went quiet, not a dropped call quiet, a thinking quiet, the kind where you can feel someone on the other end deciding something. Then Harriet said it, carefully, in a voice Claire didn't recognize. That's the third time. Claire asked what she meant. Another pause. Longer. I need to think about whether I should say this. I'll call you back. The call ended. Claire sat with her phone face down on the desk. She turned it over twice. No message. By 6 o'clock, nothing. The third time, she kept turning it over. Third time meant Harriet had been counting. She called Harriet Yoon on a Wednesday afternoon. No particular reason. The news needed more people in it. People from further back. Harriet and Claire had worked together for 3 years at a publication in South Bank. Close the way colleagues get when the editorial culture is bad enough. Shared lunches. Shared grievances. Friday wine. They drifted when Claire moved on. Not badly, just a natural drift. The congratulations came out warm enough. Harriet asked about the role, the scope, whether it was permanent. Then Claire mentioned the investigative brief. The line went quiet, not a dropped call quiet, a thinking quiet, the kind where you can feel someone on the other end deciding something. Then Harriet said it, carefully, in a voice Claire didn't recognize. That's the third time. Claire asked what she meant. Another pause. Longer. I need to think about whether I should say this. I'll call you back. The call ended. Claire sat with her phone face down on the desk. She turned it over twice. No message. By 6 o'clock, nothing. The third time, she kept turning it over. Third time meant Harriet had been counting. Harriet called on Friday morning, early, before Claire had finished her coffee. No apology for the delay. She just started talking. 3 roles. She named them specifically. Dates, organizations, what the process had looked like from her side. The first was 2011. A features editor position in Richmond. Harriet had been told informally she was the frontrunner. Then a phone call came through to the hiring manager. The shortlist was quietly restructured. Claire got the role. The second was 2014. Senior correspondent posting. Same pattern, 2 rounds of interviews. Then nothing. A brief email, no explanation. Claire's appointment was announced the following week. The third was 2019. By then, Harriet said she'd stopped being surprised. She wasn't angry. That was the thing that landed hardest. Her voice was almost clinical. The voice of someone who'd processed this slowly, over years, and arrived somewhere beyond the feeling of it. She'd never said anything. No proof. And Claire was her friend. She told herself it was probably coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence anymore. Claire had opened her laptop while Harriet talked. Her own career timeline. Every significant move. Every role. Every introduction that led somewhere. She counted. 11 inflection points. 11 moments where a door had opened exactly when she needed one. Her coffee had gone cold. She closed the laptop, not because she'd finished looking, because she couldn't look anymore. Not right then. She sat in her kitchen in Pravin. No phone, no notes, no next step, just the sound of the street outside. 11 inflection points, 11 moments she'd attributed to timing, to hard work, to being ready when the opportunity came. She'd built an entire self-concept on those moments, not an arrogant one, a stable one. The quiet confidence of someone who believed they'd earned what they had. Now that foundation had a crack in it she couldn't unfeel. How much of it was her? And how much of it was him? She picked up her phone to call Derek. Put it down. Picked it up again. She thought about his face at dinner. how genuine it had seemed, how it had always seemed genuine. 19 years. She'd never once caught him performing. She put the phone down, poured a glass of wine at 4 in the afternoon. Didn't drink it, just held it. The question she kept returning to wasn't whether Derek had done it. It was whether she'd known. Somewhere, all along, she went back to work, not because she was ready, because staying still felt worse. Investigative work had always done that, given her hands something to do when her head was too loud. She knew how to follow a thread. She submitted Freedom of Information requests to 3 former employers. Standard procedure. She'd done it before for sources. Now she turned it inward. Personnel files, correspondence, external documentation attached to her hiring records. The first file came back clean. The second one stopped her cold. A recommendation letter attached to her 2012 appointment file. Partially redacted, standard privacy procedure, but the redaction block hadn't been applied cleanly. The letterhead underneath it was visible at the bottom edge. A consultancy name she didn't recognize. A registered address in South Yarra. She searched it. Dissolved 4 years ago. Minimal web presence. A single registration record, the kind that only exists because it legally has to. She clicked through to the directorship record. One name. Sole registered director. Derek Fain. She read it twice. Then she checked the registration date. The consultancy had been registered the same month she received her first senior editorial role. The same month. She didn't call Derek. She didn't call anyone. She opened a new document and started mapping. Every role. Every recommendation. Every introduction that led somewhere. Dates on the left. Names on the right. Derek's known contacts in a third column. Built from memory. Cross-referenced against his LinkedIn history. Archive industry event programs. A decade of published bios. The overlaps weren't subtle. They weren't the kind of thing you explain away as a well-connected friend in the same circles. They were precise. The right person. The right organization. The right moment. Every single time. She needed voices, not documents. She called 2 former editors. Kept it casual. Steered the conversation toward her own appointments with the light touch she'd spent 20 years developing in interviews. Both of them mentioned Derek without being asked. The first used the phrase a strong advocate, said it warmly. The way you mention someone's good qualities without realizing you're revealing anything. The second was more specific, said Derek had really pushed for her. That it hadn't been a straightforward decision. That Derek had made several calls. Several calls. That evening, she searched an old media industry forum, found a post from 9 years ago. Anonymous, frustrated. A shortlist overridden by a consultant referral at a mid-sized Melbourne publication. The role described matched hers exactly. The timing matched. She sat back and looked at what she'd built across the document. It wasn't a theory anymore. She called Derek on a Sunday morning. Not with everything. Just one thing she could hold up and ask about directly, without showing her full hand. He answered on the third ring. She could hear him making coffee. She kept her voice neutral. She told him she'd been going through old appointment files. Said she'd found a recommendation letter attached to her 2012 hiring record. Said the letterhead had his consultancy name on it. Asked him about it. Lightly. The way you ask about something you expect to have a simple answer. He didn't miss a beat. The consultancy was a side project. Early 2010s. Small stuff. Industry advisory work. Referral arrangements. He'd written one letter, years ago, as a personal favor. He knew the hiring manager. He believed in her. He hadn't thought of it as a conflict. Calm. Detailed. Technically plausible in every part. She wanted it to be true. That's the honest version of what happened next. She wanted it badly enough that she let herself believe it for 48 hours. Monday, she went to work. Had a productive meeting with her editor. Called her sister that evening. By Tuesday morning, she'd almost filed it away. Then the third FOI file landed in her inbox. She opened it, went straight to the billing records. 14 invoices across 6 years. Derek's consultancy. Billed directly to a holding company she didn't recognize. She searched the holding company. It belonged to Anton. 14 invoices. She printed them all, laid them across the kitchen table in chronological order. The first was dated 3 months before her 2012 appointment. The last was dated 6 weeks before the Sydney posting. The Sydney posting Derek had talked her into. Every invoice in between correlated, not loosely, not approximately, precisely to a period surrounding a significant movement in her career. She thought Derek had helped her, opened doors out of friendship, out of genuine belief in her. That's the version she'd been carrying for 19 years. But you don't invoice a man's company 14 times for a favor. Favors don't have line items. She pulled up Anton's corporate footprint, the same research she'd been building for her investigative brief. Now read through a completely different lens. Then she found the 2 dropped investigations. The first was 2013. A journalist at a Fitzroy publication had been building a case around Anton's property dealings, irregular planning approvals, a counselor with convenient timing. The investigation was killed before publication. The journalist left the industry within a year. Claire had joined that publication 4 months later. She'd been given a corner office. She'd been given his desk. The second investigation was 2017. Different outlet, same pattern. Dropped at the editorial level with no explanation. By then, Claire had been senior enough that a single word from her would have carried weight. She'd never been pointed at either story. She'd never known to look. Derek had made sure of that. She wasn't a beneficiary. She was a firewall, and she'd been one for nearly a decade. Without ever knowing it, she called Derek at 7 in the evening. She didn't rehearse it. Rehearsing would have given her a way to manage the conversation. She didn't want to manage it. He picked up on the second ring. She didn't start with the invoices. Didn't start with Anton. Didn't start with the journalist. She just asked him, quietly, directly, had he shaped her career? A long silence, longer than any pause she'd heard from him in 19 years. Then he said yes, not defensively, not with an explanation attached. Just yes, the voice of someone who'd been waiting, on some level, for the question to finally arrive. She asked about Anton, about the invoices, about the 2 investigations that died while she sat close enough to both stories to have mattered. He didn't deny any of it. He said he'd made sure good things happened to someone who deserved them. He said those 2 things as though they belonged in the same sentence, as though they weren't in direct contradiction. She asked what she was to him, in all of it. What function she served. His voice dropped. I made sure you were never in a position where you'd have to choose. Then, quietly, he said he couldn't lose her, that everything he'd done because he couldn't lose her. She was standing. She didn't remember standing. Her hand was against the kitchen wall. The room had tilted slightly. She sat down on the floor. The call was still connected. She could hear him breathing. She hung up and didn't move for a very long time. She didn't cry. She'd expected to. Somewhere on the kitchen floor in Prarin. It didn't come. What came instead was quieter, harder to name. She sat there long enough for the room to go dark around her. She didn't turn the lights on. Just let the evening come in through the window. The grief wasn't about Derek. Not entirely. It was about the story she'd been telling herself for 20 years. Every story she hadn't chased, every tip she'd let go, every instinct she'd dismissed because the opportunity in front of her was too good to jeopardize. She'd told herself she was being professional, strategic, that you can't chase everything, but she hadn't been choosing. She'd been chosen, positioned, pointed away from the things that would have mattered most. Her talent was real. She knew that. The work she'd produced was genuinely hers, and none of that changed the fact that someone had been standing behind her, quietly turning her to face a different direction every time she got close. She thought about the journalist whose desk she'd inherited. She didn't know his name. She'd never thought to ask. She picked up her phone, called Harriet. 4 rings. She didn't apologize. An apology felt too small and too convenient. She just said, carefully, meaning every word, that Harriet had been right, and that she was sorry for what it had cost her. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, I know. 2 words. No warmth, no coldness. The flat, settled tone of someone who had carried a truth alone for a very long time and had stopped needing to be believed. Claire hung up, sat in the dark a while longer. She still hadn't turned the lights on. She went back to work on Monday, not because she was ready, because the alternative was staying in that kitchen until something resolved itself. Nothing was going to resolve itself. Her editor noticed she was quieter than usual. Asked once if everything was all right. Claire said yes, meant it just enough to be convincing. She'd spent 20 years interviewing people. She knew how to hold a face together when the interior was unsteady. She wrote the conflict of interest declaration that afternoon. Took her 2 hours. It should have been straightforward, factual, procedural, unemotional. But every sentence required her to name, in writing, the exact shape of what had happened. Derek's name, Anton's name, the consultancy, the invoices, the timeline. Seeing it in formal language made it real in a way the kitchen floor hadn't. She submitted it without a cover note. Her editor read it the same day, called her in, closed the door. The conversation was careful and professional and kind. The Anton thread would be reassigned. Claire would stay on the broader investigation. Her editor was firm about that. Clear. Claire thanked her and went back to her desk. Derek didn't call. Not that day. Not the day after. His silence had a texture. Not nothing, but the silence of someone who understood that saying anything would make it worse. Then Anton moved. A lawyer's email arrived on Wednesday evening. 3 paragraphs, measured and formal. Anton was prepared to offer Claire an exclusive interview, on his terms, with agreed parameters. The email used the phrase, given your long-standing proximity to this story. He thought she'd take it. He'd been watching Derek manage her for a decade. He'd mistaken the cage for the person. She read the email twice, drafted a single-line reply. Declined without explanation. Went to make coffee. She slept better that night than she had in 3 weeks. Her first investigative story ran on a Thursday. Page 2 of the digital edition. No byline photo. No promotional push. Just the piece itself. A local council approval irregularity in Brunswick. Small in scale. Specific in detail. The kind of story that wouldn't move numbers or generate shares. She read it live on the site the moment it went up. Slowly. Every word. Checking whether it held together under the weight of her own scrutiny. It did. Small. Undramatic. Entirely hers. She thought about Derek while she sat there. Not with anger. That had come and gone in the weeks between the kitchen floor and now. Arriving in waves at inconvenient moments, then receding without resolution. What was left wasn't anger. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something more honest than both. The love had been real. 19 years of evidence pointed in one direction. She wasn't willing to rewrite all of it just because the full picture was more complicated than she'd known. Derek had loved her the way some people love. Completely, and in a way that served his own needs so seamlessly, he probably never noticed where one ended and the other began. The friendship was real. The cage was real. Both things were true. Neither one canceled the other. She'd found the journalist named the previous week. 4 minutes of searching. He was teaching now, secondary school, somewhere in regional Victoria. She'd written him a letter, not to explain, not to confess on Derek's behalf, just to say she knew what had happened. that his work had mattered. She didn't know if he'd write back. She sent it anyway. She closed the laptop, picked up her bag, walked out into a Tuesday morning in Prahan. The street was ordinary. The light was flat and gray and completely unremarkable. She didn't feel free exactly. She felt like herself, for maybe the first time in a very long time. She felt exactly like herself. The cage was real. So were her wings. She just never needed anyone else to open the door.